Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be reading The Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene, part 2 of chapter 1. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. The last part of chapter 1. So basically part 1 of chapter 1 was on the inner Athena. So it talked about Pericles, and it talked about him being a wonderful, moral, and just leader, and his death, and the leader that came after him. And it talked about how the inner Athena moves within you, and how it's basically like the bridge between your heart and your mind. And it's really like bringing those two together. And so it basically is talking about how you should follow your mind and your heart. And the inner Athena is basically bringing your mind and your heart together. So this is the book. The Laws of Human Nature. And I'm going to be reading part 2 of chapter 1, which is Keys to Human Nature. I'm reading this for the first time, just like you guys are hearing it for the first time, probably. So, thank you guys for tuning in. I'm going to go ahead and start now. I'm excited because this is kind of off topic of what's going on in today's society, but like it's really fun to really learn about topics like this, and to really get your mind off of what's going on and just focus on something different, so that you can come back to whatever it is that's really serious for you in your life, and you can come refreshed, rejuvenated. So I'm starting from chapter 1, part 2, Keys to Human Nature, on page 22. Okay, I have my pencil to take notes. Oh, and I forgot to mention that I'm wearing a hoodie because of Trayvon Martin. So that's why I'm wearing a hoodie. I'm wearing a hoodie because Trayvon Martin. Because I am Trayvon Martin. That's why. Alright. Keys to Human Nature. Whenever anything goes wrong in your life, we naturally seek an explanation. To not find some cause for why our plans went awry, or why we face sudden resistance to our ideas, would be deeply disturbing to us and intensify our pain. But in looking for a cause, our minds tend to revolve around the same types of explanations. Someone or some group sabotaged me, or perhaps out of dislike, large and antagonistic forces out there, such as the government or social conventions, hindered me. I received bad advice, or information was kept from me. Finally, if worse comes to worse, it was all bad luck and unfortunate circumstances. These explanations generally emphasize our helplessness. What could I have done differently? How could I have possibly foreseen the nasty actions of X against me? They are also somewhat vague. We usually can't point to specific malicious actions of others. We can only suspect or imagine. These explanations tend to intensify our emotions, anger, frustration, depression, which can then wallow in which can then wallow in and feel bad for ourselves. Most significantly, our first reaction is to look outward for the cause. Yes, we might be responsible for some of what happened, but for the most part, other people and antagonistic forces tripped us up. This reaction is deeply ingrained in the human animal. In ancient times, it might have been the gods or evil spirits who were to blame. We of the present choose to call them other names. The truth, however, is very different from this. Certainly, there are individuals and larger forces out there that continually have an effort on this, and there is much we cannot control in the world. But generally, what causes us to go astray in the first place, which leads to bad decisions and miscalculations, is our deep-rooted irrationality, the extent to which our minds are governed by emotion. We cannot see this. It is our blind spot. And as the exhibit A of this blind spot, let's look at the crash of 2008, which can serve as a compendium of all varieties of human irrationality. In the aftermath of the crash, the following were the most common explanations in the media for what had happened. Trade imbalances and other factors led to cheap credit in the early 2000s, which led to excess leverage. It was impossible to place accurate value on the highly complex derivatives that were being traded, so no one really could gauge profits and losses. There existed a shrewd and corrupt cabal of insiders who had incentives to manipulate the system for quick profits. Greedy lenders pushed subprime mortgages on unsuspecting homeowners. There was too much government regulation. There was not enough government oversight. Computer models and trading systems ran amok. These explanations reveal a remarkable denial of a basic reality. Leading up to the crash of 2008, millions of people made daily decisions on whether to invest or not to invest. At each point of these transactions, buyers and sellers could have pulled back from the riskiest forms of investment, but decided not to. There were plenty of people out there warning of a bubble. Only a few years before, the crash of the giant hedge fund long-term capital management shows exactly how a larger crash could and would occur. If people had longer memories, they could think back to the bubble of 1987. If they read history, the stock market bubble and crash of 1929. Almost any potential homeowner can understand the risk of no money down mortgages and lending terms with fast rising interest rates. What all the analysis ignores is the basic irrationality that drove these millions of buyers and sellers up and down the line. They became infected with the lure of easy money. This made even the most educated investor emotional. Studies and experts were pulled in to bolster ideas that people were already disposed to believe in, such as the proverbial this time it's different, and housing prices never go down. A wave of unbridled optimism swept through the masses of people. Then came the panic and crash and the ugly confrontation with reality. Instead of coming to terms with the orgy of speculation that had overwhelmed one and all, making smart people look like idiots, figures were pointed at outside forces. fingers are pointing out at outside forces. Anything to deflect the real source of the madness. It is not something peculiar to the crash of 2008. The same types of explanations were trotted out after the crashes of 1987 and 1929, the railway mania in the 1840s in England, and the South Sea bubble of the 1720s, also in England. People spoke of reforming the system. Laws were passed to limit speculation, and none of this worked. Bubbles occur because of the intense emotional pull they have on people, which overwhelms any reasoning powers an individual mind might possess. They stimulate our natural tendencies toward greed, easy money, and quick results. It is hard to see other people making money and not join in. There is no regulatory force on the planet that can control human nature. And because we do not confront the real source of the problem, bubbles and crashes keep repeating, and will keep repeating as long as there are suckers and people who do not read history. The recurrence of this mirrors the recurrence in our own lives of the same problems and mistakes, forming negative patterns. It is hard to learn from experience when we are not looking inward at the true causes. Understand, the first step toward becoming rational is to understand our fundamental irrationality. There are two factors that should render this more palatable to our egos. There are two factors that should render this more palatable to our egos. Nobody is exempt from the irresistible effect of emotions on the mind, not even the wisest among us. And to some extent, irrationality is a function of the structure of our brains and is wired into our very nature by the way we process emotions. Being irrational is almost beyond our control. To understand this, we must look at the evolution of emotions themselves. For millions of years, living organisms depended on finely tuned instincts for survival. In a split second, a reptile could sense danger in the environment and respond with instantaneous flight from the scene. There was no separation between impulse and action. Then, slowly, for some animals, this sensation evolved into something larger and longer, a feeling of fear. In the beginning, this fear merely consisted of a high level of arousal with the release of certain chemicals alerting the animal to a possible danger. With this arousal and the tension that came with it, the animal could respond in several ways instead of just one. It could become more sensitive to the environment and learn. It stood a better chance of survival because its options were widened. This sensation of fear would last only a few seconds or even less, for speed was of the essence. For social animals, these arousals and feelings took on a deeper and more important role. They became the critical form of communication. Vicious sounds or hair standing on end could display anger, warding off an enemy or signaling a danger. Certain postures or smells revealed sexual desire and readiness. Postures and gestures signaled the desire to play. Certain calls from the young revealed deep anxiety and the need for the mother to return. With primates, this became even more elaborate and complex. It has been shown that chimpanzees can even feel envy and the desire for vengeance, among other emotions. This evolution took place over the course of hundreds of millions of years. Much more recently, cognitive powers developed in animals and humans, culminating in the invention of language and abstract thinking. As many neuroscientists have affirmed, this evolution has led to the higher mammalian brain being composed of three parts. The oldest of the reptilian part of the brain, which controls all automatic responses that regulate the body. This is the instinctive part. Above that is the old mammalian or limbic brain, governing feeling and emotion. And on top of that has evolved the neocortex, the part that controls cognition and, for humans, language. Emotions originate as physical arousal designed to capture our attention and cause us to take notice of something around us. They begin as chemical reactions and sensations that we must then translate into words to try to understand. But because they are processed in a different part of their brain from language and thinking, this translation is often slippery and inaccurate. For instance, we feel anger at person X, whereas in fact the true source of this may be envy. Below the level of consciousness awareness, we feel inferior in relation to X and want something he or she has. But envy is not a feeling that we are ever comfortable with, and so often we translate it as something more palatable: anger, dislike, resentment. Or let us say one day we are feeling a mood of frustration or impatience. Person Y crosses over our path at the wrong moment and we lash out, unaware that this anger is prompted by a different mood and out of proportion of Y's actions. Or let us say that we are truly angry at person Z, but the anger is sitting inside of us, caused by someone in our past who hurt us deeply, perhaps a parent. We direct the anger at Z because they remind us of this other person. In other words, we do not have conscious access to the origins of our emotions and the moods they generate. Once we feel them, all we can do is try to interpret the emotion, translate it into language. But more often than not, we get this wrong. We latch into interpretations that are simple and that suit us, or we remain baffled. We don't know why we feel depressed, for example. This unconscious aspect of emotions also means that it is very hard for us to learn from them, to stop or prevent compulsive behavior. Children who felt abandoned by their parents will tend to create patterns of abandonment later in life, without seeing the reason. See trigger points from early childhood on page 32. The communicating function of emotions, a critical factor of social animals, also becomes somewhat tricky for us. We communicate anger when it is something else we are feeling, or about someone else. But the other person cannot see this, and so they react as if personally attacked, which can create cascading misinterpretations. So let me read that sentence again. We communicate anger when it is something else we are feeling or about someone else, but the other person cannot see this, so they react as if personally attacked, which can create cascading misinterpretations. Emotions evolved for a different reason than cognition. These two forms of relating to the world are not connected seamlessly in our brains. For animals, unburdened by the need to translate physical sensations into abstract language, emotions function smoothly as they were meant to. For us, the split between our emotions and our cognition is a source of constant internal friction, comprising a second emotional self within us that operates beyond our will. Animals feel fear for a brief time. Then it is gone. We dwell in our fears, intensifying them and making them last well past the moment of danger, even to the point of feeling constant anxiety. Many might be tempted to imagine that we have somehow tamed this emotional self through all of our intellectual and technological progress. After all, we don't appear as violent or passionate or superstitious as our ancestors, but this is an illusion. Progress and technology have not rewired us. They have merely altered the forms of our emotions and the type of irrationality that comes with them. For instance, new forms of media have enhanced the age-old ability of politicians and others to play on our emotions. Let me read that sentence again. For instance, new forms of media have enhanced the age-old ability of politicians and others to play on our emotions in ever subtler and more sophisticated ways. Advertisers bombard us with highly effective subliminal messages. Our continual connection to social media makes us prone to new forms of viral emotional effects. These are not media designed for calm reflection. With their constant presence, we have less and less mental space to step back and think. We are besieged with emotions and needless drama as the Athenians in the assembly, because human nature has not changed. Clearly, the words rational and irrational can be quite loaded. People are always labeling those who disagree with them irrational. What we need is a simple definition that can be applied as a way of judging as accurately as possible the difference between the two. The following shall serve as our barometer. We constantly feel emotions, and they continually affect our thinking, making us veer toward thoughts that please us and soothe our egos. It is impossible to not have our inclinations and feelings somehow involved in what we think. Rational people are aware of this, and through introspection and effort are able to some extent to subtract emotions from their thinking and counteract their effort. Irrational people have no such awareness. They rush into action without carefully considering the ramifications and consequences. We can see the difference in the decisions and actions that people take and the results that ensue. Rational people demonstrate over time that they are able to finish a project, to realize their goals, to work effectively with a team, and to create something that lasts. Irrational people reveal in their lives negative patterns, mistakes that keep repeating, unnecessary conflicts that follow them wherever they go, dreams and projects that are never realized, anger and desires for change that are never translated into concrete action. They are emotional and reactive and unaware of this. Everyone is capable of irrational decisions, some of which are caused by circumstances beyond our control. And even the most emotional types can hit upon great ideas or succeed momentarily through boldness. So it is important to judge over time whether a person is rational or irrational. Can they sustain success and hit upon several good strategies? Can they adjust and learn from failures? We can also see the difference between a rational and an irrational person in particular situations when it comes to calculating long-term effects and seeing what truly matters. For instance, in a divorce proceeding with child custody issues, rational people will manage to let go of their bitterness and prejudice and reason what is the best overall long-term interest of the child. Irrational people will become consumed with a power struggle against the spouse. Irrational people will become consumed with a power struggle against the spouse. Will let resentments and desires for vengeance secretly guide their decisions. This will lead to a protracted battle and a damaged child. When it comes to hiring an assistant or partner, Rational people will use competence as their barometer. Can this person do the job? An irrational person will easily fall under the spell of those who are charming, who know how to feed their insecurities, or who pose little challenge or threat, and will hire them without realizing the reasons. This will lead to mistakes and inefficiencies, for which the irrational person will blame others. When it comes to career decisions, rational people will look for positions that fit their long-term goals. Irrational types will decide based on how much money they can immediately make and what they feel they deserve in life, sometimes very little. How much they can slack off on the job, or how much attention the position might bring them. This will lead to career dead ends. In all cases, the degree of awareness represents the difference. Rational people can readily admit their own irrational tendencies and the need to be vigilant. On the other hand, irrational people become highly emotional when challenged by the emotional roots of their decisions. They are incapable of introspection and learning. Their mistakes make them increasingly defensive. It is important to understand that rationality is not some means of transcending emotion. Pericles himself valued bold and adventurous action. He loved the spirit of Athena and the inspiration she brought. He wanted Athenians to feel love for their city and empathy for their fellow citizens. What he envisioned was a state of balance, a clear understanding of why we feel the way we do, conscious of our impulses so that we can think without being secretly compelled by our emotions. Pericles wanted the energy that comes from impulses and emotions to serve our thinking self. That was his vision of rationality and our ideal. Fortunately, to acquire rationality is not complicated. It simply requires knowing and working through the three-step process. First, we must become aware of what we shall call low-grade irrationality. This is a function of the continual methods and feelings that we experience in life, below the level of consciousness. When we plan or make decisions, we are not aware of how deeply these moods and feelings skew the thinking process. They create in our thinking pronounced biases that are so deeply ingrained in us that we see evidence of them in all cultures and all periods of history. These biases, by distorting reality, lead to the mistakes and ineffective decisions that plague our lives. Being aware of them, we can begin to counterbalance their effects. Second, we must understand the nature of what we shall call high-grade irrationality. This occurs when our emotions become inflamed, generally because of certain pressures. As we think about our anger, excitement, resentment, or suspicion, it intensifies into a reactive state. Everything we see or hear is interpreted through the lens of this emotion. We become more sensitive and more prone to other emotional reactions. Impatience and resentment can bleed into anger and deep distrust. These reactive states are what lead people to violence, to maniac obsessions, to uncontrollable greed, or to desires to control another person. This form of irrationality is the source of more acute problems, crisis, conflicts, and disastrous decisions. Understanding how this type of irrationality operates can allow us to recognize the reactive state as it is happening and pull back before we do something we regret. Third, we need to enact certain strategies and exercises that will strengthen the thinking part of the brain and give it more power in the internal struggle with our emotions. The following 3 steps will help you begin on the path toward rationality, it would be wise to incorporate all three into your study and practice in human nature. All right, so that was part 2. Keys to human nature. I guess that's the introduction to the steps, because there was only about page 22 to page 28, so it was only about 6 pages, so not bad. All right, thank you for tuning in to part 2 of chapter 1 of The Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene with the E. I hope that you check out the book, and I will see y'all soon. Thank you for watching.